legacy is not something that you reflect on at the end of your life.
Yeah.
Legacy is something that you build, and it starts the day you are born. I would love to dispel this idea that your story is only worth telling and your knowledge is only worth sharing if you're famous. It's not true.
Yeah,
it's
just not true.
No.
Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Sean. I'm the owner and founder of Memoria Films, where we are all about connecting generations within the family. And on this video podcast series, we talk to industry professionals, researchers, people who are already doing incredible work in the intergenerational space. And today I'm so excited to be joined by a dear friend, Joseph Itaya, who is actually a fellow video biographer and someone that I just respect tremendously. I'm going to read his bio because he's got so much going on. He's, first and foremost, he's the founder of Legacy Films based in Los Angeles, doing video biographies. He's also a professor of communication and the program director for the Digital Media Management Master's Program at, get this, University of Southern California. That's right. Joseph has also produced over 100 legacy films on multiple continents, something that I absolutely aspire to, hopefully one day be able to say. Notable clients such as Norman Lear, Brian Glazer, Walter Mondale, Sugar Ray Leonard, many others. I mean, if that list isn't long enough for you already. He's also an award-winning feature filmmaker and a 20-year educator. I am so excited to have this conversation. Joseph, thank you so much for joining me today.
Sean, it's great to be with you, and thanks for that warm, kind introduction. I remember our very first conversation when I think I reached out to you just because of a Google ad, and within about 30 seconds, we realized, boy, we're doing the same thing, and our hearts beat in very much the same way.
Absolutely. I got chills thinking about that moment, and I feel like there have been so many of those moments over the years. But yeah, we've had the privilege of working together on a couple projects and even some legacy film projects, which I think is really cool to think about, you know, creators who are in the same space. And you might be tempted to think that we're competitors, but I think with the kind of work that we do, we both share the passion for just telling as many people's stories as possible. It doesn't matter who's behind the camera, who's, you know, directing. It's all about just doing as much as we can for families. But before we dig into our conversation, I have to do this and put you on the spot here. I do this with all my guests. And since we're in the business of telling life stories, if you had to tell your own life story in under 5 minutes, I know it's a tall task. Give me the major beats of Joseph Itaya's life.
Sure. My story really begins before I was born, as all of us do, and it's something that is really important and the reason why I am so committed and passionate about telling intergenerational stories. I'm half Japanese. The Japanese side of my family is from Hiroshima, Japan, and we lost everyone in that horrible, not horrible day. And so, as a half Japanese person, I spent my childhood living in the San Juan Islands outside of Seattle, in a tiny little town. And then my summers were spent in Hiroshima, Japan with my grandparents. So I grew up in a very interesting and I would say unusual set of circumstances, going back and forth, having a feeling for these different cultures, and two sides of the family that frankly didn't understand each other all that well. Right. And that heartbreak is one of the things that I've seen happen with some families, and it certainly happened with mine, and that was one of the reasons why I thought that it was really important for families to be able to tell their stories, for different generations to be able to communicate. But as I grew up, I actually started off my life, I was a very serious musician. I was a classical concert pianist and toured around a whole bunch. And when I got to be, I was just graduating from my undergrad and at the University of Washington, and it hit me, no more music, no more classical music. I just didn't feel that was the kind of contribution that I wanted to make. I was so moved by films and stories of people. And I just thought to myself, gosh, if I could spend my life creating that kind of storytelling and inspiration for real stories of real people, that would be a great contribution. I hadn't even conceived of legacy films at that point. I just wanted to become a feature filmmaker. So I left Seattle, and the only city that I'd ever really lived in full time, and went for graduate school at USC Film School. Got married, and early 20s, and started on this film production journey.
Wow.
I was doing some commercial production. I had a dream of making feature films, but I was also, just to support my young family and myself, and I was teaching piano lessons, private piano lessons. And one of my students said, "Hey, you make films, don't you?" And I went, "Yeah." And he said, "My dad is this amazing guy, and he built all this huge company. And every day I go to the office and I'm learning all these great lessons from him, but he's getting a little bit older, and we keep saying, 'Hey, Dad, would you write a book?' But he's like, 'No, that's not really my thing. I don't want to write a book. I'm not really a writer.'" So he said, "Any chance that we could just we could do some interviews with him and maybe drive around to some of his key real estate development projects?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Sure, that's not a bad idea. Why not? A personal documentary. Sounds a little small, private, just for a family." And we went and we did it. And after that happened, we began to collect interviews from friends and family, and sat down and did a really deep and in-depth, not just his life story, the chronology of what he did, but what he learned along the way. And after it was finished and we gave it to his family, I remember I got a phone call from his daughter, his 45, 50-year-old daughter, and she was crying, and she said, I never really knew my dad until I watched this film."
Wow.
And it hit me in that moment that this is something that can solve a real problem for families. And then they showed it to a few friends. All those friends called and said, "Hey, any chance you'd want to make one for me and my family?" And that was almost 20 years ago now, and we've been doing this ever since.
Incredible. I know this is a big focus of yours, is telling these stories, not just for the sake of the chronology, but really to kind of like package life lessons from someone's life story. And as an educator, you probably see the importance, and the necessity for this more than most people. Can you talk a little bit about why you think this is so important to do, and just how you take someone's life story and sort of extract like key lessons that you want to pass down to future generations?
Absolutely. It's a great question, Sean. Thank you for asking it. So my brother just finished up medical school, and we were sitting down and asking him some questions about it. And it became very clear that the things that he's learning, it was a culmination of generation after generation, doctor, teacher, going back hundreds and thousands of years. And it became so clear that if those brilliant people, those brilliant doctors, hadn't written down and recorded the things that they had discovered and learned and passed it on, then it's almost like, first of all, we'd have no medical industry to speak of, and no medicine, and people would still just be getting sick and dying. But all the things that they learned, they might as well not have learned them at all, because recording it and passing it on is the essence of knowledge and wisdom. In our country, in the United States, unfortunately, we have the cult of the individual. And there's this idea with the American dream that each person pulls themselves up by their bootstraps, and they start here at zero when they're born, and they make their way up. They learn a whole lot of things, and then they die. And then the next generation does this, and then it's over. In other cultures, people grow, they live with their parents, they live with their grandparents, they stand on the shoulders of that family. And sometimes they go into the same business, and now they're starting here and they go to here. And I really think that in our country and in our culture, we don't do that well enough. We get together as families sometimes, and what do we talk about? We talk about how the sports team's doing.
Politics.
What's politics? We argue about that.
Oh my gosh.
What's the last vacation we went on? What's the next vacation we're going on? We go through that process, and we just tell those stories, and that's it. And so a whole lifetime can go by. Have we really shared anything meaningful of value? It's hard to say. So we wanted to create a space and a forum in which people could sit down and say, okay, I've learned some things. I've built some things. And there's money, there are resources, there's real estate, there's all these things that have been created. But the person who created all that was you. there's all this intellectual capital and
Yeah.
value and knowledge that is stored up from a lifetime of challenges and mistakes and
Yeah.
on and on and on. And so you have to extract that and think about how you're going to pass that on to your kids with the same level of intention and discipline that you're planning on putting together your will and passing
Yep.
on your real estate and stocks and holdings and this and that, and have the exact same level of intentionality and focus.
Yeah. I think, Joseph, you bring up a great point about the medical field. And I think you could extract that line of thinking to so many different professions. Why do you think it is that we, in a lot of places in our culture, we value sort of looking back on history, learning from mistakes, but then within our own families, at a societal level, like we don't do this? Like, I don't know. I know this is a big picture cultural question, but I don't know if your time at USC as a professor and obviously doing hundreds of legacy films has taught you anything about, what I think C.S. Lewis deemed chronological snobbery, where we just think that because we're further along in time that we're better off or more sophisticated, more intelligent than our predecessors. But what do you think is the root cause underneath all this, and why we don't take our family history as seriously as we do the history of medical inventions or, things like that?
In answer to your question, and then Sean, I'd love to hit this tennis ball right back at you and ask
Hmm.
you if you have a reason that you've come across with the films that you've made. I
Hmm.
know that with a certain generation, people, they don't want to come across as arrogant. Sometimes they feel I've lived a pretty normal life and it's really not worthy of a legacy film. Legacy is such
Yeah.
a,
Yeah.
some people find it a sort of a showy word. I've also had some people who decided not to do it, who looked at it and then decided not to do it. They went, "Well, who'd want to hear what I have to say anyway? My kids,
Mm.
this would
Oh,
just collect dust. They're not really that interested in my life and what I have to say." I've seen some children of legacy clients who've even teased their parents. Gosh, what are you making this for? And but
wow.
100% of the time, 100% of the time, once they get into the process and once it's finished, they discover that it is not an ego trip. They discover
Yeah.
that it is not some puff piece about making yourself aggrandized in any way.
Yeah.
Because the
Yeah.
way that we approach it is always more about how you can really mine your core values and the lessons that
Mm.
you've learned and figure out a way to mentor future generations. And then also, I have to say, to create bonds, to create
Yeah.
generational bonds, to help
Yeah.
people understand that's why you're like that, you're great at cooking, or you're just a fantastic surfer, or gosh, you've got a head for business.
Yeah.
That's You're just like your grandmother or grandfather. And
Yeah.
that's why we do this, so that you can meet someone you never met and you
Yeah.
can get a better understanding of yourself for it.
Oh, it's so
I'm not
good.
sure I'm exactly answering your question, Sean. I'm talking through it and
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah.
through it out loud. So, I mean, I'd love to ask the question right back to you. Why do
It's,
you
yeah.
think that in our culture we don't place the focus on it
Yeah.
that potentially other cultures do?
Yeah. Well, I asked you because I don't have the answer. But I do think there's so many factors at play. I think looking back at history, and I come from, I have a faith background, and just even reading the Bible, I know this was like oral history that was passed down. Like there were habits of storytelling and passing down wisdom from one generation to the next. And then somewhere along the way, at a cultural level, I mean, I think even a geographical level, families being split apart, right? Like for centuries it was multi-generational dwelling houses, so like
That's
you're
right.
living with your grandma
That's
and your
right.
aunt, and like, so the family unit was literally like in close proximity, physical proximity with one another. And so the potential for those stories being told, there was just more opportunities, right? So I think that's one big factor, is just the literally the spreading of humanity, right? And the ease with which families now are just split apart. I mean, my I have family here in the desert, but the majority of my family, a couple hours away over there, across the country over there. So we'd have to do a virtual call or something. And then I think, so that's one big factor. I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about just, I love this phrase, the cult of the individual, and how this is probably more mind boggling to me because we have the technology to overcome the physical distance, right? Between us and our relatives. Like there's still things that we can do to tell those stories, to facilitate those conversations, whether we're living in the same house or not. But what's a bigger problem is we don't care. Like we don't actually think that those stories are worth preserving, or we're too busy, we're too distracted. I mean, we don't even really have to talk about social media and what it's done to the human psyche and how much damage, how much havoc it's wreaked on society at large. So again, I'm dancing around the question too, because I don't think there's one short, concise answer. I think it's a myriad of factors that have played into this. But when you look at the landscape of the family and how much we've departed from these habits of storytelling. And I think you said this as well, right? Creating the opportunities, the platform through which we can tell these stories. I think right now I'm realizing that there's a huge need to just educate people on the importance of storytelling. And there's a lot of research to back that up, especially when we're talking about like child development, identity development. You talk about your own family, and certainly with the history that your family has, that is an integral part of your formation as a human being, and that trauma. So I think what I've discussed so far is really more focused on the barriers for the younger generations. What, in your experience, speaking about the older generations, what's the barriers in their mind aside from the ego, which you've already mentioned?
One of the things that I remind people when we're talking about doing this process is that it might be about you, but it's not for you. It is a gift that we're asking you to take time out of your life to give this to your grandkids and great-grandkids who you may never meet. Because nobody is going to teach them about who they are and where they come from. Nobody's going to teach them unless you do it. And we all believe in our culture, and grandparents love their grandkids and beyond more than anything in life. That's literally what they live for. As parents, Sean, you and I are both parents. We know that's what we live for. Now, I want to tell you, I haven't made any piece of my own legacy film yet either. Have you?
I know. No. My wife and I have talked about it, and so
there it is.
I guess we have no place. To talk about
right
because we haven't. Totally.
And I think that we need to remind ourselves and to take our own medicine about this because let's see, I'm 44, almost 45. Sean, how old are you?
35, almost 36. Yeah.
Okay, great. And you've got 2 young kids, right?
Three kids, 8, 6, and 4.
There you go.
Yeah,
I've got 3 kids myself. Another thing that I preach is that legacy is not something that you reflect on at the end of your life. Legacy is something that you build, and it starts the day you are born. And we know that you have to be intentional about the things that you do, from your finances to your career to the way you build your family and take care of your loved ones, the way you take your wife out on a date and make sure that she knows how much you care about her, and that you're creating adventures as families, and on and on and on. And every family has different core values, but we know that this is important. Otherwise, you're just another leaf blown in the wind of life. So the question that we need to continue to ask ourselves and push ourselves to do, especially as professionals in this area, is why it's so important for us to do it. And I believe at any age, not when you're 80 or 90 and all those life lessons have receded so far into the past that you're having a hard time remembering it, but right now. So I really believe in the idea of a family legacy project. Maybe it's the 70, 80-year-old generation, and then their kids who are in maybe the 40, 50-year-old generation, and down to their kids who are in the teens, and get everybody talking about it and thinking about it. Because even through the process, the exercise and the experience of doing it, something comes out and something changes. So, Sean, I think that you and I need to make each other's legacy films.
Seriously, I no, totally. I'm game for that. And I think let's just hit the nail on the head when you talk about legacy being not something that that you discuss at the end of your life. And let's be honest, most of the clients that we're working with, I've had a couple younger couples, and I'm grateful for those opportunities because they saw the value of this. But by and large, we're dealing with people who are, in their 70s and 80s. Their families have requested to kind of document their story, but as we talk about legacy building, I think a huge part of your legacy is your story, right? Obviously, we know it's much bigger than your story. And I often tell people this, it shouldn't be less than your story, than your personal history, right? And the things that you went through and the things that your parents went through and your grandparents. And hopefully we're passing all these things down. But I think this is a good time to just kind of transition into the landscape of services that are out there right now to help people, tell their life story. And as I look at the landscape, it seems like most of the services are geared towards, elderly people. I think it's interesting. I'm curious if you share this sentiment, but I felt like maybe 10 years ago, everything was about ancestry and DNA research and genealogy. I think there's a place for that. It helps you uncover aspects of your history that you couldn't otherwise uncover, right? Because these people are deceased, so you can't, unless those stories have been passed down, you wouldn't know that your great-great-grandmother came from, right, XYZ country. But it seems like all the services that are out there have definitely shifted more towards the story aspect, towards documenting your life story. And I'm thinking about, the Storyworths of the world. That's probably the behemoth. That's the gorilla in the room. I'm curious why you think something like a video biography, aside from the reasons that we've already talked about, why people don't talk about this as a legitimate, I don't know, like a player in the space. Would you agree with that?
Sean, that's why I'm really glad that we are doing this together. I've spent countless hours just trying to educate people, converse with people, convince people of the need for this.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult being in an industry that is still nascent and is still somewhat unknown. And the more companies that begin to populate this space, once upon a time, there was only one car company and everybody went, what do you need? Like, I don't need a car. I've got a horse and a buggy. And then over time, there were more and more car companies, created a slightly more crowded landscape, but it became something that was suddenly in everyone's consciousness, and they began to think about what it was that they needed to do. So I'm really happy that Ancestry exists, and 23andMe, like you just mentioned, exists, and then some of these other companies like yours, because the more that we can encourage people to find someone they feel comfortable with, to get together and talk about the things that they know and then pass on that wisdom, then think of the collective knowledge that just exists in our country.
Goodness.
Let alone the whole wide world. And I would love to dispel this idea that your story is only worth telling and your knowledge is only worth sharing if you're famous. It's not true.
It's just not true.
No, there's plenty of famous people that I probably am not all that interested in what they have to share with me. And then maybe somebody who's an electrician who might have just the right piece of information about parenting or how to pivot your business or what you do if you're having a midlife crisis or what's the best way to invest your money or any number of different life questions that could come up. So my hope and wish and dream and mission, frankly, is to be part of a change in this overall culture that we have here, where people realize that the greatest value in life is love, and being able to share that knowledge, that wisdom, that supportiveness and encouragement with people who need it. And those people might be your own family, and they might be people you never even meet, but they will be forever impacted by things that you've shared, challenges that you've faced and grown through, and how you came out on the other side and learned something. That's the essence of storytelling, is change.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Oh man, so much to think about. As we talk about video biographies and how important, let's give people the real sales pitch, right? On why video biographies should be considered amongst the behemoths of the landscape of preserving your story, your memories. So like, I know on my website, I talk about three big things. One is video, more than any other medium, captures the whole person, right? So you've got the voice, facial expressions, body language, all that. Obviously, the story goes without saying. A second big part of video biographies is the ability to consolidate a lot of assets in one place. So that I'm talking about, obviously, your story, your pictures, your videos, digitizing all that stuff and putting it together, plus adding music for emotion, things that, other services can't do. And then I think the third big selling point, I would say, or reason why people should consider video biographies is because they're the most accessible medium out there, right? I mean, just with just a simple link, I can share this video with as many people as I care to share it with, and I don't need to buy more copies of this book or that. It's like, do you have any other big things that you talk through with your clients as to why video biographies are so powerful? I'm going to add them to my website, whatever you say. So just
go for it. I love it.
Yeah.
I always learn something every time I talk to you, Sean, and it's great. It's fantastic. And again, because I think of us as colleagues and supporters, and I believe in the mission more than I believe in just any one business. And I know that we have so many great collaborations ahead of us out there in the future. I think that the three that you mentioned are fantastic. Those are probably three of the absolute pillars of what I tell people as well. I would also mention that because families are scattered across the country and maybe even across the globe now, the ability to share memories and to share laughter and joy and then preservation is really, really important. Otherwise, it just disappears. I almost never take photographs anymore of my kids because I noticed that when we go back and we want to relive that holiday or that vacation or that memory, a photograph is frozen and it doesn't capture the moment. So my wife likes to take pictures, and my phone storage is constantly running out because I really only take videos because that's what we like to go back and watch. That's what actually captures the moment, like you mentioned. And that's the thing that can be shared with friends and family. Now, there's a new wave that is happening and coming that begins to call into question, quite frankly, now we're going to get philosophical, but the whole question of existence and consciousness in some way. And that's this question of AI, VR, AR, and we're seeing it now with ChatGPT. We have the ability to do some pretty amazing things digitally.
We don't know what the future is going to hold and how those technologies are going to impact the landscape of storytelling. But one thing is for sure, I think whatever happens with AI, you're already seeing this shift towards authenticity and reality, not virtual, not augmented, but actual reality. And so I think it's going to become more and more important that, again, we document our stories, whether that's through video biographies, obviously, whether, there's some new service like what you're developing that's going to help us all meaningfully consolidate our actual memories, because who knows? I mean, we've already seen it with the most famous people out there, how AI can literally make stuff up and that looks real. And I don't know that it'll ever get to the point where it can recreate your grandmother, to the level that it does, where there's so much information out there, so much video available of, these really famous people. But I don't know. I think it's more important now than ever that we take this work seriously. And I'm just really grateful to be in the space with you. You've been a mentor and someone that I look up to, and, to be able to work together in this space and hopefully to reignite a passion around family history and storytelling. It's cool just to think that we're going to be doing this work together for God knows how long, as long as he gives us. And thanks so much for your time today, man. You got my wheels spinning even more with what's possible, and I hope you enjoyed the time too.
I certainly did. Thank you, Sean. It's always a pleasure spending time with you. I think the last time I saw you in person was at In-N-Out out in the desert.
Right. We shared a burger together. That's
and
right.
We were just shopping for burgers for our families, but we'll have to get together again at some point in person and spend some more time. So thanks for this opportunity to sit and chat about it. I always know that I grow when we interact and have some new green offshoots.
Great. Thanks so much, Joseph. And we'll leave links below for where you can find Joseph online, certainly his social channels. So thanks again, Joseph, for your time. And everybody, we'll see you next time.
Thanks.